Emily, hello. Thank you for joining me on an episode that's a little different for us, wouldn't you say? Navigating social media and the parasocial relationship.
It really is. Although it's safe to say that in the world of social media, every day is different from the last.
Fair, fair assessment. I find, you and I are both on social media a lot. You and we talk about this. You and I have had two conversations on a podcast. You come at it as elder millennial, correct?
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
and I'm a Gen X. I'm not going to call myself an elder Gen X. I'm just, Gen X. But you and I certainly swim in the whole social media world. And we wanted to talk about this topic in general because of an event that happened a few days ago. And that is the announcement that Dave Hollis, the ex husband of self help guru, lifestyle guru, for lack of a better word, passed away over the weekend. And so many people are experiencing this death through social media. And since you and I did discuss it on your podcast earlier, I thought it would be a good opportunity to discuss the relationships that people have with someone like a Dave Hollis and his ex-wife, Rachel Hollis, but also just navigating parasocial relationships and parasocial relationships when something abruptly changes in that relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's so many layers with which you can discuss it because there's the parasocial relationship that the public has with that person, and then there's the very unique position that we're in where you have this tragedy happen, and yet in the SEO results, you have us last year talking about this in a very tongue-in-cheek, funny way, sort of poking fun at the whole situation. And it's very interesting to navigate a world where your words are kind of cemented in the Google searches despite all the changes.
Yes, and this is why we're talking because let's just start at Monday night. We'll start there. So we'll start in the very micro moment of Monday night. We'll expand from there. I was traveling, I was on the road, and I happened to see the Variety article about Dave Hollis's death. Now, you and I have discussed, as you mentioned, Dave Hollis on your podcast. So immediately when I saw that Variety article, I started Googling and looked at the Dave Hollis search results. Now, granted, I'm on Google, so Google's going to feed me the Molly feed, but there it was, our conversation, a very heavy SEO laden post about our conversation that we had with Dave Hollis. So you and I are part of that search result. So when you reached out to me, I thought you are exactly the person who I want to hear from about this because we need to discuss, or as I said in an Instagram story, we need to close the loop a little. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, completely. Because the way that I found out was SEO related because on TikTok, it's one of my most viral videos to date. It was one that I made last year, just a general overview of the Hollises, so Rachel and Dave, talking about their rise and where they are now or where they were last year. And so I guess on Monday when the news broke, I had people searching on TikTok, because as we both know, it's becoming more and more of a popular search engine. And
Mm-hmm.
so all these people were commenting on my video, like, he passed away. Where's the follow up? Oh my God, like wanting to discuss it in this post that obviously has a very, very different tone to,
Yes.
to the situation.
And that tone is what let's move the conversation to where people can really see and feel this tone. And that's in Reddit and my whole connection to the Hollis universe. As I wasn't a fan per se, I never invested one penny, in the couple, but just being in the online space, I was very familiar with their work, very familiar with who they were, how they operated. As someone who has an online business, you as well, I track online influencers and I've always been quite fascinated and now highly scrutinizing the practices of a lot of these mega influencers that became big in a certain time of the internet when communities were a lot easier to grow and there was more fertile ground for them to grow and they became much bigger mega influencers. But this business model where they all work together in these masterminds, they all feed each other, have affiliate links with each other and help each other grow, while peddling this advice, how easy it is to grow these communities. So I come at it with a little bit of an edge. And so that's why this, when Rachel Hollis, and you and I have discussed this, when she had her TikTok moment in Toiletgate, where we saw, the glimpse, kind of the veil was lifted and we saw the real Rachel Hollis kind of look down on her followers. And then from that came the divorce, certainly. And then this whole social media zeitgeist, that, as you would call it, that all these people were just kind of drawn in to this drama that happened. So just talk a little bit about, about that type of culture and why that grows and why people are so interested in it.
Well, I mean, yeah, like you and I have talked about it from a very critical point of view. And when I say it, I should specify, like, we're talking about the public face that these folks have put forward. Obviously, we don't know them, and I don't know if you ever get this comment, but I'll be talking about people. I'm generally always talking about it from a reporting / media literacy standpoint, and so people will say like, "Oh, you're exploiting this situation." And I'm like, well, you wouldn't say that to the news, because the way I see it, like TikTok in some ways is a bit of a democratization of news. It's like decentralized. Anyone can give their takes, and people come to my pages. I'm sure they come to yours for your version of the news. And so we've been very critical of that. And then when this happens, it's so deeply personal and yet public, because life and death, these universal concepts, they really scare and haunt people, yet we're all going to experience both. And so it really makes people like stop and go through a pretty visceral reaction that is both separate and yet like inextricable from the public face and from their body of work that they've put forth. Because their whole, like, I'm talking about when the Hollises were still together, and even I guess after their divorce, their whole business model was quote unquote like being open about their lives, being like very vulnerable about what's going on in their lives, or like their version of that, and talking about the ins and outs of the difficulties of their relationship and their fights and their intimacy. Like everything was kind of like out there and in some ways for sale. So what do you do with that when you have this horrible tragedy of one half of that pair like going before their time?
Yes, and it's quite a journey, and I think this is the first time, as someone who tracks parasocial relationships, this is the first time where I'm noticing this event create such an abrupt shift in people's feelings towards another person. Because it's remarkable to me to follow a subreddit for the better part of 2 years and have most of the people snark on Rachel Hollis, her ex-husband Dave Hollis, his former girlfriend, Heidi Powell, the whole group or cabal of them. And then all of a sudden, in a moment, this event happens, and how it makes this hard turn into a subreddit now focused on grief. So let's just even talk about parasocial relationships, in general. I taught a college class last semester on, just social media and just social media relationships and how we interact with the media behind it. And we did have a section on parasocial relationships. And I ran the students through a questionnaire and asking about people who they follow. Like, who do you have a strong connection with, online? Who do you follow on YouTube? Who do you follow on television? And I would ask these questions, what's their name? Where are they from? What do they like to wear? What are their favorite TV shows? What's their favorite musician? And the students followed it through, and they realized at the end that they had this almost, tight, intimate relationship with this person. And then I asked in the end, have you ever met him? No. And so, and that's the definition. It's a one-way relationship. In often cases, it's people who frequently, touch base with them, but there's no chance of rejection, from this person, because there is no relationship. So people kind of feed into it. And so celebrity And social media influencers is just natural fertile ground for these types of relationships to happen. So do you see it in your world at all? People having these types of relationships?
I mean, of course. And what's so fascinating is you have all different kinds of relationships. From on one end, you have extreme fandoms where if you so much as imply that Harry Styles doesn't breathe, every breath is precious that comes from him. It's like, they feel the need to like attack and leave him alone, that sort of thing. That's on one extreme. And then on the other, you have, I would say, Reddit snark, where it's like these people who, many of which are like not doing well in their lives and live to pick apart every single part of these people's lives. I'm not saying anyone who's ever written report, like tapped into a snark page is unwell, but like a lot of these people who spend so much time on it, like clearly are going through something and choosing to project it onto these people. And then you have this moment that kind of like it puts all of that on hold. And like you said, there's an immediate shift. And you mentioned like you hadn't really seen such an abrupt shift. And for me, I'm also coming at this from the perspective of grief and loss is something that's very interesting to me. I have a book that I'm writing in the background. It might see the light of day maybe in like a decade, but it's a pretty ongoing work where I would like to be talking about all the unexpected parts of grief and death that I don't really see people talking about. And this is not really to do with celebrities. This is more to do with my own personal experiences with these things. And one of the things that I've written about a lot is how people can be very vilified, and then at the moment they pass, that quickly shifts, and they've sort of, to not to be crude, but like they can do no wrong, and they're sort of sanctified a little bit.
Yes, which is definitely happening in the subreddit right now as it relates to Dave, because the snark level on him was so high, and then no one heard from him online, over the course of 48 hours. So that was even ratcheted up. And then you have this abrupt, it's almost like just hitting a wall. All of a sudden it's announced, that he had died. And to discuss this from a parasocial, point of view, I think you and I both feel the same about it. It's not necessarily, a positive or negative relationship. It's really just, it's a neutral relationship in the sense that by definition, it's just having a one-way relationship with someone who's in the public space. It was created, and this is straight from my syllabus, from last semester. The term was coined in the 50s by two sociologists, Horton and Hull. And what they were talking is they're looking at it as the illusion of a friendship between a spectator and a performer. So it's creating this excitement. If you think back into the 50s, you were around Elvis Presley and Confidential magazine, tabloidism. It's where we wanted to bring people closer to the celebrity. So they're more invested emotionally, and then also, financially, in the end. So they buy tickets and posters and they get really excited, and they actually think maybe one day, Elvis Presley will marry me, or Paul McCartney, will pick me out of a crowd. But because of social media now, the distance has now been shrunk. We are now so much closer to the people who we see online through not only just video and chats and podcasts and YouTube videos, but also chats like DMs. Sometimes we'll hear back from these people, or they'll reply to a comment. So people who are seeking something, love this connection with them. But to be clear, it's not necessarily a bad thing. We don't want to paint everyone who is invested in these people or invested, in the Hollis universe as necessarily bad.
Well, actually, I would say even the contrary, because I think that the worst thing that could happen to a public figure is for them to become irrelevant, is for no one to be talking about them. Then they don't book gigs. They don't get to hold on to their wealth. They fade into obscurity. That is ultimately, I think, the worst thing that can happen to a quote unquote celebrity, because as we've seen time and time again, from influencers to A-listers, whatever, no matter how negative the controversy, people talking about them generates buzz. It generates attention and eyes on them. And even if they have to pivot and shift what their career looks like, they're being talked about. They're in the public consciousness. So they need that. And so when I get these comments like, oh, leave, XYZ person alone, I think a lot of the time it's from much younger people. And, I get that you don't fully put things together when your prefrontal cortex isn't really formed yet. It's okay. But ultimately, I want to say, like, what do you mean leave them alone? I don't have their phone number. There's a very slim chance they even know who I am. And also, the reason that they're on tour, that you have this love for them, that they get to make music, is because we're talking about them, good, bad, and everything in between.
Yes, you are bringing up a very, very good point. So if we were to, match this and overlay this with a diagram, again, so I'm going back into my classroom. So if you think of a parasocial relationship in an inverted triangle, so at the top of that triangle, it's just pure entertainment. So where it came from, it's Elvis Presley then to Austin Butler now. It's just, we love to follow celebrities. We love to listen to their music and find out who they're dating. And it's just from a pop culture, just entertainment point of view. But then the middle line of it becomes more personal and more intense. And there's different layers to that intensity. And then at the bottom of that triangle is that borderline pathological, where it gets dangerous. And so for my generation, I think anyone my age would remember Rebecca Schaefer, who was in a TV program, and she was killed. God, his last name was Bardo. I should have researched this, but she played a character on, oh my gosh, I should have Googled it, Sam. Like, her character was Sam on television, network television, and she was stabbed. He came to the house and stabbed her. Or just like, John Lennon, when he was killed. Those are extreme cases of parasocial relationships.
The Manson murders, there's,
or even the Manson, of course. There's so many different examples of them that are out there. But what you and I are talking about is that middle layer where it's intense. And it's very, very personal. And so when people like you or me discuss these people online, some people take great offense to it. And it could be a Meghan Markle, for instance, or, it could be someone like a Dave Hollis. Now, you're talking about the relevancy. Like, I wonder in that. So if we were to bring it now back to Dave Hollis, and I know I should just say, as a trigger to some people, I've looked at that Reddit, that subreddit before you and I were chatting. There are people in there who are grieving intensely over the loss of this person who has been in their life almost daily, when he was married to Rachel, and then after Rachel. And certainly there's a lot of guilt that's attached to it too, because of being a part of this community. So what can you say of someone who's experienced grief personally yourself, just with the loss of a parent, and then you see a parasocial death? Like, what's the difference there, other than the obvious? But what do you think from a parasocial point of view?
Well, it's so interesting because obviously they're very different things when you know someone personally or when it's just a celebrity. But when I was mentioning that one of the things that I'm interested later down the line in my career, I'm interested in talking about what that relationship is with that person after they pass away. I think it's a disservice to treat that person as a one-dimensional being, but that includes acting as if they were a saint. Like, I know, for my mom, wherever she is out there, like, she was a very pretty cutthroat lady, and like, she would be calling BS on anyone saying like, oh, she was this, just sweet as pie, like, she'd be like, oh my god, give me a break, like, so that's part of what motivates me, is to, I think, honoring the person involves addressing them as a fully formed person. But when you have someone like the Hollises, who, I mean, I'll just say it, people love to hate, then it gets messy. I'm not saying like, no, anyone who is on a snark page needs to stay snarky. Like, I'm just saying anytime you discuss these matters, whether it's someone in your life or you're talking about a celebrity, people go into a very, they kind of go into their reptile brain where they start like really thinking about like their own mortality or like the people around them. They aren't really thinking fully rationally. I completely understand. It's, you see it's like the biggest fear for a lot of people. I think like tied with public speaking, something like that. It's on people's minds. So something like that will trigger this. And so then I understand the guilt, and I understand like trying to figure out what your role is when you've spoken public words about this person. And in a lot of ways, we're a part of that. This situation is out of my control, but I would be lying if I didn't say there's a part of me that feels a little guilty that when you now Google David Hollis, there's like me basically last year kind of poking fun at him. Mm-hmm. Even though I do feel that I am coming at it from a respectful point of view, and I don't think I was saying anything super out of line, but still, just on a human level, I don't love that that's now out there in the SEO world.
Yes, and I feel the same way as someone who has analyzed, really more of my ire, if you will, or my focus was on Rachel Hollis because of my work in public relations, crisis communication, and focusing on that reputation renewal piece. When Rachel Hollis went through Toiletgate, that's what drew me in. I was so fascinated from a professional point of view, watching her navigate that and waiting for her to apologize in the right way, and she never did it. But then the personal aspect of it is they happened to go through a divorce the same time I was going through a divorce. So that's where the parasocial piece came in, because I was fascinated watching that marriage fall apart. And it was sad, but I'm a parent of 4 kids. And I'm someone who is online. So to watch a couple fall apart online was fascinating to me.
Who also have kids themselves together.
Yes, exactly. And then watching Dave Hollis then become his own brand was interesting to me. And as a runner, I was interested in Dave Hollis because he was running and, filming how he was running. But then it's this natural, as I gravitated towards this subreddit page, I was looking at it from a professional point of view as well, because I do work in the response. There's a PR crisis. How do you respond? And watching this community of now over 12,000 people, all saying the same thing. They're all demanding the same thing. So when I found out about Dave Hollis, I was in Ohio speaking. And what I was speaking about in my keynote was how to respond properly when you've been called out for something. When people are pushing back at you, how do you respond? And Rachel Hollis to this day still hasn't responded in a way that her community has accepted. There's been no full accountability there. And that has bled over into Dave Hollis as well. And so now with him out of the picture, there's a lot of people who are just left almost gasping. Like, what do we do with all this? It's really about energy. They have all this energy and they don't know where to put it. So they feel kind of guilty that, like you said, we have to sanctify him at this moment. But do we really need to do that?
Yeah, I mean, the answer lies somewhere in the middle, and that ties into something that I've really learned from you. It's one of the best pieces of wisdom I've gotten from just all of our conversations, which is the middle ground exists. Speak to the middle. We talked about this in terms of PR crisis, but it also can apply to parasocial relationships where there's the extremes, there's the 10%, there's the dangerous, there's the stalkers, there's the, people who spend 18 hours a day on a snark page. Then there's the adoring fans who, will be up in arms about any criticism. And you need to keep in mind that those two extremes are very, very noisy. They're very loud, and it's hard to remember that they're not the majority. So the middle exists. And that's also something that I've gone into just this recording with that in mind, that the two extremes I don't think would be able to hear us chatting about this, having this debrief, and take it as we intended. But the rational middle ground folks will understand that we are trying to address the nuances of a parasocial relationship in a very unique situation like this.
And it is very unique because you can follow other people like Ilaria Baldwin, for instance, Alec Baldwin's wife. He was, recently charged with involuntary manslaughter due to a shooting on the set of his film Rust, where he was an executive producer as well as an actor. And we've seen Hilaria Baldwin, really put herself out there. And I recently did an interview, in Australia, television interview, where they were asking about Hilaria Baldwin. And I said, I think she's kind of running as a diversion right now to take the heat off of her husband, Alec, because he's under such legal jeopardy, that she's kind of drawing in these, people to come, chase her, if you will. And people have a
you and I are in sync in that way, because I hadn't seen you do that interview, but I made a TikTok saying similar things where like I actually like slowed down the clip of her yelling like "Ven aquí" to the paparazzi.
Oh, I think I saw that. Yes. Yeah, you and I said the same thing.
And I'm like, okay, we've had the accent, but we haven't had you full on speaking just in a full Spanish sentence to the people of New York. Like the fact that this is happening in the aftermath of this, of the charges coming out against Alec, I don't think is a coincidence, whether consciously or subconsciously on Hilaria's point.
Oh, absolutely. And so this is another example, right, of this abrupt shift. Like, so these people in these, there's a snark page, dedicated to Larry Baldwin that I only stumbled on because I was on it because, it came up in an SEO search because people put some of my videos on there talking about her, which again, kind of weird, that you are now indelible forever, talking about the discussion there. But again, she's someone people have an intense relationship with her of dislike. I don't know. There's a lot of, pro Ilaria people out there, but again, a very deep relationship. So when her husband has charges against him, that intensity, builds in a way, but she wants it. And I think that brings it back to full circles, what you said. They need the relevance. And certainly in that Hollisville, I'll call it, and Dave Hollis's ex-girlfriend, Heidi Powell, in the subreddit, daily someone will say, we know they're in here. We know that they're creating and curating content for this subreddit so they can increase engagement and get people talking. And that speaks to what you're saying, is you are playing off and leveraging that parasocial relationship for engagement and views and ultimately money. Yeah.
And in the case of Hilaria, I think, again, I don't think any of us can really understand fully what makes her tick because, I think there's very, she's very committed to the bit, and has been called out and just, continues to double, triple down. So it's not a fully rational thing that you can like try to understand how she's working, how she works.
We want to, though. We want to. Don't you want to know the playbook that she and Alec discuss as they move forward with this?
Well, I have what I imagine has gone on, and I've done my own podcast deep dive on Alec and Hilaria, but whether she meant to do this or not, I think it was masterfully done. Her little impromptu press conference, her running around New York in an empathy sweater, doing coffee runs. I'm like, I've ordered coffee to my house when I've been tired. Like, just nothing going on in my life other than I'm just Uber Eatsing, like, over, like a nice latte because I'm just having a day where I just need that. She didn't need to do that. And yet she was running, and we both made content about this, about her ushering in thick accent, thicker than ever with the Spanish, holding her child Ilaria without the H, and like talking about leave my kids alone, and it was so well done in what I think the intention was, which was to take the heat off Alec, because I'd say 75% of the headlines that I saw that week were about Hilaria, Hillary from Boston, and not the manslaughter charges against Alec, which is it doesn't get much more serious than that other than first-degree murder charges.
Oh, absolutely. And this is why I find this so interesting, because it's an interaction that's for now. This is not a discussion that we had 2 years ago, but creating online social media viral content with video, because we've moved from Twitter. Like, the cancel culture started in Twitter land, when people would write statements or they would post, the notes app would go up there. But now everything works in a video world. So people have to manipulate public opinion in a much different way. And Hilaria is masterful at it, in a crazy way. She's crazy good at it. I mean, that's what we'll give her. Is she knows she has to draw them. She has to draw these people, like just put her into her fray to create that SEO and video, which is much more powerful online, to push down any of that ALEC content. And the crazy thing is, it worked. It actually worked.
Yeah. Yeah, you're making me, I mean, like if TikTok and, short form video wasn't the thing at the moment, like I guess the Twitter equivalent would have been, a Spanglish statement where it's like, déjame en paz, like leave my niños alone, like, just that sort of thing. But it's so much more powerful in video form. And it really, I'm amazed at how it did the trick, because I also dug into the charges against ALEC to see like, what is the meaning of these manslaughter charges, involuntary manslaughter charges, and where does the fault lie? Obviously, it's not for me to say, but looking at all that went on set, and I won't get fully into it here today, but the fact that he was a producer, the fact that there was so many red flags that popped up on set while there were very risky conditions. In my view, it seems warranted, the charges, and that will be obviously not for me to decide whether they should move forward and the final verdict on that. But I'm just so amazed at how little of the discussion centered around that.
Yes, and my theory on that as well is I feel like when those charges, in New Mexico, when they're discussing what these charges are going to be, I think public opinion, particularly online public opinion, weighs on these types of decisions. Because if he did get off scot-free or without any charges, now the scrutiny would be on them. And so they needed to match the charges, or at least, get close enough so there'd be the public acceptance that the charges matched the crime. And so again, this is where, social media and just online communities, and whether it's a curated community like you might see on a Reddit, or if it's just a mobilization of people, ad hoc mobilization of people who come together around an idea, it's an incredibly powerful force.
It really is, and it's so much more complicated than it used to be. Whereas if you had like a public figure in this type of scenario, the court would do their best to select jurors who it's like, okay, don't read, one of the 3 newspapers that are talking about this during the trial. We can't do that now. What are you going to do? Take everyone's phones away for 6 months? Like,
right.
They're going to be exposed to news about it, therefore public sentiment, so that will influence them no matter how much they can try to be unbiased about it.
Yes. Okay. Oh my gosh, Emily. Well, then let's, for our final piece of it, let's, loop back it again when we were discussing, how we got here from the beginning, discussing, just the death of someone who had a significant following, which we'll say it fell in certainly the positive and negative sentiment. Some of us were in the neutral, but people, a lot of people love the Hollises, Rachel and Dave Hollis combined, but then after the divorce and so many of their fans and former fans feeling that the two of them just lacked accountability. And the word that you see a lot on that subreddit is grift. They all felt taken. And when people feel that there's an injustice there, they want to seek some type of retribution. They want to have, some type of action happen. And so I think that's why this left so many people shocked, is because they were waiting for something to happen. Either to, Dave Hollis or Rachel Hollis or, Heidi Powell even, but no one imagined that happened would result in, one of them just passing away in their sleep, which is incredibly tragic.
Absolutely. And until there's, if or when there's a statement on the cause of death, we don't know what happened, what my main thought is really for their young kids and, how tragic that is for them. Like my thoughts of grief go towards them, and ultimately all the speculation in the world, like it it doesn't really have a place. I had people, because I'd made content, so people were asking me in a group chat, like, okay, well, was it this? Was it heart? I'm like, we don't know. Yes, he's had medical problems recently. You have no idea. There could be any one of infinite things, so there's not really a point in speculating until they decide to let the public know.
And so just even the cause of death is interesting in a Reddit world, because people followed them to such precision like detail. They knew what they ate. They knew what they didn't eat. They knew the competitions, how much they ran. People speculating, was it because he was a runner, which I hated personally because I'm a runner? Was it the vaccine? Then we had to go down the whole, anti-vax hole and all that other stuff.
Yeah. Then you get QAnon thrown into it. And
exactly.
And we know in the case of Rachel Hollis, because she had written a book about the aftermath of the passing of her brother, we know how she has handled previous passings in her life.
Yeah.
Obviously each one's different, but we've seen so many facets of what she's put forth. So
absolutely. And so now I think what makes this uncharted territory is people know, intimate details, about these three. I put Heidi Powell in the mix because she is, like you said, she is someone who is curating her life around engagement in so many ways that there's so much speculation, but nobody wants to say it on that Reddit. No one wants to be the person that has their remarks, that question of, well, what was the cause of his death, and have that indelible post live forever, on there. But certainly people are curious. And I think what a lot of people are curious about was it something in the lifestyle, because in that subreddit, there were a lot of people who were concerned about his health. Dave Hollis was open about addiction and drinking. And a lot of people saw him in this intense physical competition, where the bodybuilding competition. And, and there was just a lot that he put on his body. And a lot of people in there, worried about his health. And I don't think because Dave Hollis was public, but he's not at the realm where it would make news when the autopsy was released. Like, I don't think this is something the public will ever know. So people will always be left wondering, what really happened.
I'm coming from it from the point of, I imagine that I think we would find out just through Rachel Hollis.
It'll be leaked somewhere? Leaking?
Oh no, I'm saying through Rachel Hollis.
Really?
I just imagine her, maybe not immediately, and obviously this is just completely speculation, but just, just from the fact that she has published works about personal grief in her life. She talked about Dave's issues with addiction before he had made any public statements about it. She's just has been pretty open about every category of her life, which even the categories that tend to be fairly off limits for most people and what they want to speak about publicly. So that's a guess on my behalf, but maybe we won't. And like, whatever the family wants to do.
That's a good point.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Whatever the family wants to do, obviously, like, we respect that. I'm not saying like this is, I want one or the other, but I'm just saying based on the nature of Rachel Hollis's relationship with the public and the work that she puts out, I would imagine that this could be on the table at some point.
That's interesting take, because you're bringing in the content aspect and the online persona aspect of it, and someone who has apparently a serious radio contract, a satellite radio contract, and I believe a book coming out. So she's someone who needs to continue that relevancy, as you say, but also, which is a Rachel line, but also she needs to navigate this as a full-time parent. Now, the other piece of it that you bring up about her talking about being so open with Dave and talking about his addiction and kind of laying the skeletons to bear, the way I'm coming at it, again, parasocial, because they were going through a divorce. Like, I saw the ping-ponging. To me, that was a couple that was no longer together having a divorce in public. because, Rachel Hollis, exposing conversations with her therapist and exposing, the secrets inside their marriage, that speaks to, what are you saying? Is she doing it just to get it off her chest? Is she doing it to help other people going through it? Or is she doing it for engagement?
And when I'm talking about like what she might make into content or not, like, keep in mind, like going back to what I mentioned earlier, I plan on writing a book about my own loss in my life. So that is not a judgment call on her. Like it's simply saying that her talking about personal taboos is a common thread in her career. So in that way, I wouldn't put that out of the realm of possibility.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I'm going to agree with you on that. I think we probably will hear something. To what level, to what extent, we don't know, because certainly she'll want to protect her kids. And ultimately, that's how I look at it when we all, and you had brought up death. It's so personal. And when someone dies, what is their reflexive action? We think of ourselves. And I immediately thought of, oh my gosh, this is a parent of 4 young kids, as a mother of 4 kids. That's where my head went, and it still lies there, thinking about, their kids, and even wondering, this is total parasocial, but having kids who play sports. I know he's a kid who's plays travel ball. We know that because of the subreddit. And I'm thinking, okay, who's driving this kid to travel ball? Because the mom lives in Austin and he plays travel ball, where his dad lives. So all those complications is really a part of a parasocial relationship.
Yeah, well said.
But speaking of well said, Emily, thank you for sharing your insights, not only from the social media perspective, the parasocial, but also just grieving and how we grieve ourselves personally, but how we do it through our work and through our missions and through our value systems, and tying in your experience, your personal experience with the loss of your mother, and kind of comparing it to what we're seeing with this family as well.
Oh, well, I mean, I appreciate it. And I'll say this is one commonality between me and Rachel Hollis. I wouldn't say there's too many, but this is one of them, is that I think we both feel compelled in a certain way to talk about taboo topics, and find that a very interesting thing to talk about publicly. So yeah, this has been a very fascinating conversation and very much top of mind for me. So thanks for allowing me to come on and chat about this with you.
Okay, you just something you said now. Before we go, I have to say this, because I did not think of this until you just said it right now. Is this the reemergence of Rachel Hollis, coming off of her experience of what is happening with her family right now and herself? And not looking at it disparagingly, like not monetizing grief, or, another term is called being a grief tourist, where people latch on to other people's grieving. And is she going to, latch on to her ex-husband, what happened to her ex-husband? But she may find this as a way to help her through the healing, and with her kids as well. That might be interesting to see. So thank you for bringing that insight.
We'll find out, I guess.
I hope we were respectful. Were we respectful in this? This is a dodgy topic.
Well,
you and I both wanted to be respectful with this.
I defer to the Molly McPherson school of PR. Like, seriously, the way that I went into this, because we're both very, very, very aware and concerned at treating situations with the respect that it deserves. Mm-hmm. And so as I was thinking about today, how can I approach this from the most respectful point of view, I thought, again, the MP school of talking about these things publicly, I'm going to speak to the middle. I'm going to speak to the 80% of people that will be level-headed, might be having similar thoughts themselves, might find it interesting or maybe even cathartic to have a debrief about this type of thing. And for the 10% on either end, there's not much that we would be able to do to get to them anyway. So all I can do is just try to hone in on like my moral compass, and I know the same, and we both try to really keep that as sharp as we can. And that's all we can do.
Yes, very well said. Thank you so much, Emily, for taking the time to have this conversation with me. A difficult one, but an important one. And I really enjoyed hearing from you. Thanks.
I appreciate it, Molly. Thanks for having me on.